All right. Well, it's exciting to have with us today the Open Rent Initiative. We have several members of their team. We've got Arjun Kakar, Biniam Gebre, and Flo Sutanto. Hopefully, I'm saying all of those names correctly, as well as Dan Hilton. So this is a really neat project looking at how rent varies across the country, trying to provide data so there can be informed public policy decisions around zoning, around housing displacement, and other related issues. So really great to have the team with us today. Arjun, you want to introduce yourself and the team here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Arjun Kakur. I am the Director of Engineering at Citizen Codex, and Open Rent Initiative is a part of Citizen Codex's initiatives. And so, yeah, really excited to showcase this to y'all today. But I'll pass to Pinyin.
Hello, my name is Biniam Gebri, and I'm also very excited about this initiative. As somebody who's been in the housing world for a very long time, it's this tackling this problem is a very exciting effort, and we'll talk more about it. But I'm the project executive for Open Rent. Hello, and then Dan.
I'm Flo Sutanto, and I'm a data analyst at Citizen Codex. And so for Open Rent, I've been helping with some of the data analysis, and yeah, very excited to be here. And Dan?
I'm Dan Hilton. I'm research manager with Housing Link. We're a partner organization with Open Rent, and I'll say a little bit more about our organization in just a bit.
Very good. Good to have you all here.
Amazing. So I'll maybe share my screen and then we can kick this off.
Awesome. And if it's okay, I'll ask questions throughout, if that's all right with you, Arjun.
Please do. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Good.
Okay. Um, okay. Biniam, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's maybe jump to the introductory page. So I think the something that is kind of obvious to a lot of people, but when you get into the details, isn't so obvious, is the importance of rent and the rental markets and the lives of folks across the country. Rent is touches nearly 45 million Americans who are renters. There are so it's a huge part of the economy and society. It's a big expense for many Americans. Housing generally is the biggest expense many Americans have, but in the rental world, it is very significant. And in many cases, you have lots of households who are what we call sort of severely cost burdened, where more than 50% of their expenses actually go to paying the rent. There's a lot of people who for whom you can't really get your head around the economics of a household without getting your head around rent costs. And then you've got governments who are, the government who's spending billions of dollars supporting the rental housing market. We show here just the federal government, but you've got lots of state governments and local governments who are also spending billions of dollars supporting the rental market. So the rent generally is a very big deal, not just as a housing market issue, but also as a question around the economics of households and families and questions around poverty, economic growth, et cetera. So it matters a lot. And if you go, Arjun, to the next page, because it matters a lot, we kind of are at a loss as to why the data around it is so bad. And so we did some work to get our head around this issue about the availability of data around the rental markets. It's in the in the circles around rental housing research, it's a well-known problem, but it is a problem that has been, we'll say, kind of neglected from the perspective of the public good. And there's lots of data that's out there. There's the government surveys that the census does. There's commercial brokers who provide specialized data. There are local data sets. There's data that lives in many places, both at the county level, at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level, across many different types of organizations. And unlike the single family homeownership world where there's a robust amount of data that's collected and available for policymaking and research. The same does not exist in the rental world. And without good data, it's really hard to make good decisions. And so having, again, been in kind of the housing world for a long time, I'm shocked by the kinds of decisions that are made with like very poor data. And so so that's kind of the general sort of context. It's a really important issue. It's the data around it is bad, and we want to kind of solve it. And so what we are aiming to do is not create kind of new data sets, but to figure out a way to knit together all the data that lives in many places, to create a common good in public infrastructure for policymakers, researchers, entrepreneurs, and others who are interested in affecting positive change when it comes to household household economic well-being and general economic opportunities. So that's it. It's kind of the core of what we're trying to do with Open Rent. Again, this is a open data, open source initiative. We're kind of housed in the PSL as a nonprofit effort, and thank you, Jason, for the support, for allowing us to be a part of your organization as our fiscal sponsor. So this initiative has a couple of components to it. Arjun, if you go to the kind of the next page. So at its core, what we're building is a technology infrastructure. So we're building a platform that is trying to kind of solve the integration of this kind of disparate data sets that are out there. So that's kind of at its core what we're trying to do. But of course, given kind of the nature of this data and where it lives, we can't really do this well without the right partnerships. And so having kind of the right local partnerships as well as national partnerships that allow us to access that data, aggregate that data, understand that data, and make that data available to those who need it is another core part of this initiative. And the last is actually doing something useful with that data. And so we expect that others will do a lot with the data, but we ourselves are also interested in providing insights to the public, policymakers, researchers, and others about what the data is saying. So it's kind of the three core components of the initiative. It's kind of a real quick rundown of the introduction for the initiative. Jason, if you have any questions, then I'll pass it on to Arjun.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the background, Bidiam, and I know you've had experience working at HUD and have seen this firsthand, right? The data that's available is disjointed, maybe not comparable, and I really appreciate the efforts you're making to make that open database here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the three-pillared approach that Biniam just outlined is really interesting to me because I find that I'm drawn to the technological side of things, like the data platform, the technical backend, and all of that. But really, without partnerships and the insights that are generated from it, the data doesn't do anything by itself. And so I love the approach that we've outlined here as sort of this synergistic thing that all like becomes a self-reinforcing mechanism. So yeah, we can dig into, so what we're going to do today is dig into each one of these pieces and sort of showcase what we've been doing in each one to really paint the picture clearly. And the first component of that is the data platform itself. So we've been doing a little bit of work in terms of actually like implementing a prototype and essentially making progress towards that vision of a large scale data platform. And what we have so far really is a prototype of that focuses on two regions, Minnesota and Los Angeles County. And we've integrated a couple of different data sets so far. So as a base layer, we have parcel data. And then built on top of that in LA County, we have some rent control data. We have some listing data for both regions, although it's only a fraction of total listings that are out there. We also have affordable housing data, which Dan is going to get more into a little bit later on. And then for context, we also have some aggregate data sources like the American Community Survey and Zillow Observed Rent Index that we've sort of paired with it. So I'll actually quickly switch over to show you all a view of what the prototype looks like so far. So give me 1 second to do that. Okay. And so this is what the prototype looks like so far. And just going into the view here, you'll notice that there's a set of parcels that is the base layer of the map. And then there's a couple of parcels that are identified as yellow, and these are the ones for which we actually do have unit data available. So clicking in on one of these, I can just walk through what the information displayed here looks like. So for this parcel in particular, we've highlighted a couple of different parcel characteristics. That it was built in 1925. There's 20,000 square feet. It has certain assessed value and so on. And then paired with that, we have some unit level data available for this parcel. And in particular, that there's 2 units in this parcel that were listed for rent. And the average of those listings is $950. Which again, then compared to the Zillow Observed Rent Index is much lower. And you can basically just do this exercise for a bunch of different units and just start observing patterns and trends. But another one I'll point out really quickly is this one, which doesn't have listing data, but instead has data from Housing Link, and in particular the Streams dataset, which is a dataset of affordable housing and affordable housing units. And that this parcel in particular has 98 affordable housing units with sort of different income restrictions for rental. And it also has some market rate units that are identified. And then quickly to switch gears and show you something in Los Angeles, here we have East LA, and a lot of these parcels have rent control units on them and rent control data from Los Angeles County. And again, zooming into one of these, you can see that there's yet another different data set available here. And we're talking here about rent control data from LA County, and this one has a $1,300 mean rent compared to the American Community Survey, slightly lower. But essentially, this prototype showcases that we can take all of these different fragmented data sets and pull them together into one cohesive view and be able to talk about all of these different rent data in one place and actually pull it together.
Yeah, Arjun, with this screenshot up, I think this is really interesting that you, again, not just brought them all together, but we can see distinctly how the different sources are reporting different rental values. Could you kind of touch on the benefits of including these 3 different values? Because it looks like the Zillow market rent obviously is not capturing the local rent control policy. And then the American Community Survey is measuring something else entirely, it seems. Is there a way we can kind of think about how these different measures are coming into play in this one unit here?
Yeah, totally. And I think this goes to the heart of the issue here, which is that the data fragmentation essentially creates these pockets of information that are different based on the approach that you might have taken. So Zillow Observed Rent Index is specifically measuring listings that are on their platform and doing a bunch of additional computation on top of that to adjust it to a sort of comparable value to the ACS, perhaps. The American Community Survey is, a 1% sample every year. This value in particular is from the 2023 5-year estimate, which is effectively an average from 2018 to 2023. And so that time lag and the difference in the kind of sample that was used to create this estimate can be a factor in terms of the difference there. And then finally, these 2 are aggregate data sources, which are talking about a zip code, which honestly in a community like, or in a city like LA, can be encompassing many different neighborhoods which have many different characteristics. So the granularity is the other component that's at play here. And so I think, like, Thank you for that question, Jason. 'Cause I think it really nicely highlights the benefit that you can have by looking at really granular rent data and the kinds of things that you can say about local dynamics that are different from what you might be able to say with aggregate data sets.
Yeah, oh, great decomposition there. And obviously the map is beautiful and the ability to zoom in, but then yes, highlighting the difference between those aggregate estimates over a zip code, which seems small, but as you point out, isn't when we're talking about these specific units and how rent varies, very specifically across neighborhoods. So appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so then quickly switching back to the presentation that we have. So I just spoke about one component of the initiative, which is the data platform, but I'll pass to Dan now to talk through a little bit more about partnerships and then Housing Link in particular. But Dan.
Great, thanks. So as I mentioned, I'm Dan Hilton. I'm research manager with Housing Link, and I'll just say a few words about our organization and our partnership with Open Rent. Housing Link is a Minneapolis-based nonprofit that primarily serves low to moderate income Minnesotans with a variety of affordable housing resources. But in addition to our core mission, we have also been building and maintaining critical rental data infrastructure in Minnesota for over 2 decades. We've created both an affordable rental inventory and a private market rent database. And as a trusted source of information, we think, our work supports informed decision making for policymakers, planners, advocates, other partners, and we feel that that's a mission that closely aligns with the vision of Open Rent. We have a local focus. We're Minnesota only, but our approach, we think, is inherently scalable. Expertise and data sets we maintain, we hope could serve as like a model for other communities and provide a foundation for understanding trends and policy impacts nationally. So the subject that we're looking at today is a local one. It's the rent stabilization ordinance in St. Paul. But it's one of a growing number of similar ordinances nationwide, though they all vary in their implementation somewhat. And I know not everyone watching this is necessarily a housing policy specialist, so I'll just start with just a very high, quick definition is that rent stabilization is a government policy that limits how much landlords can increase rent in order to keep housing affordable. And it's one of those housing policies that sparks a lot of debate because on one hand, it's designed to protect renters to help people stay in their homes by preventing sharp rent increases. But on the other hand, it's controversial because some worry that it could discourage new housing construction or make it harder for owners to keep up their buildings. And St. Paul's rent stabilization ordinance includes some important exemptions to the policy that are hoped to sort of incentivize developers and investors in housing. And a couple of those exceptions include exceptions for newer properties and also for housing that's already income restricted or affordable. But we think that we know that a lot of development that happens in St. Paul is affordable development, and you're talking about properties built since 2004 are exempt from the policy. So that's like 20 years of development history, and so we think it presents the question how much of the city's rental market actually falls under those exemptions. So that's what we're exploring today using Open Rent data. By looking at which properties were built and whether they are existing affordable, we can get a clear picture of actually who's affected by the policy and who's not. And it's really the power of that kind of data work. It helps us move beyond, just sort of opinions that are based on, or debates that are based on opinion, and look at how policies like rent stabilization actually play out across the city. And so with that, I think we'll turn it back to Open Rent folks.
Flo, do you want to walk us through the work that you've been doing? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so, as Dan introduced, we took a look at the Rent Stabilization Ordinance of St. Paul. And to do this, we pulled together a couple of different but connected data sets. First, we used Minnesota parcel data from the Minnesota Geospatial Commons. And so this contains information about the parcel properties and their geospatial boundaries, which Arjun has demonstrated through the prototype. Then we use the City of St. Paul's Certificate of Occupancy, which basically acts as a rental registry and lets us know which residential units are rental units. And lastly, we used affordable housing and rental listings from Housing Link. And so this allowed us to compare the number and the rent of affordable versus non-affordable units, which became crucial to our analysis. And so, yeah, very interesting findings that we have here. We basically found that there were about 63,600 rental units in St. Paul. And of the 63,000, 40% of them fall under the ordinance exemption. And so that's the two group below, the 22,000 affordable units and the 4,300 new market rate units are exempt from the stabilization ordinance. And when we look at the median rent breakdown, we see some interesting dynamics here. The ordinance primarily protects old market rate units, so non-affordable units built before 2004. And so for these units, rent increases are capped at 33% every year, which keeps rent relatively low, you can see. And then when we look at the units that are actually exempt from the ordinance, and so these are units whose rents can increase at the discretion of the landlords or the developers. They fall under two classes, as Dan has outlined before. We have 22,000 affordable units. And so these units are exempt from this rent stabilization ordinance, but they're already protected by the subsidy program mechanism, such as from public housing or Section 8. Their rents are tied to income, area median income, or are like income restriction in general. And so while their rent increases, they're exempt from the 3% cap, their rents are kept low by that mechanism. But then when we look at the last class, these are the market rate units that were built after 2004. So these are newer constructions, newer properties, and they command the highest median rent. From these numbers, about 20% higher than the rent cap units. And since they're exempt, rent can increase more than 3% every year. And so the numbers may be smaller, but there are significant implications. This, for example, could widen the affordability gap between renters. This could create tenant volatility in newer housing, and it could concentrate higher rents in parts of the city where newer construction is clustered. And so, yeah, this is just a snapshot of the rental market dynamics in St. Paul that we found and generated using the data and framework that we have at OpenRent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat, Flo. If you or Dan could speak to kind of where you're getting, so the data on the rental amounts, those are coming from with Housing Link. Does that just cover the units covered under RSO or units in those other categories as well?
I can actually speak a little bit to the question of the rental data. The listing data itself is actually coming from data that Open Rent Initiative has gathered, and not specifically Housing Link data. And those are essentially just a subsection of, or like a sample of the units that had listings available when we gathered them. And so these are sort of like a smaller size, not all of the units that are outlined here. So yeah, so really a sample of the market essentially.
Okay. So the 63,600, that's coming from the parcel analysis, what Flo outlined, where you're matching all the possible rental units there, and then you're saying for the median rent amounts, that's from a subsample analyses of these various groups within the market. Okay. And when you say listings, so are you like scraping rental listings, or is there another source like a data provider that you've partnered with there?
No, currently we're scraping rental listings. So we have in the prototype a like a data engineering workflow that like does this on a automated basis, and we're hoping to
Hmm.
scale that further as well. But currently, yeah, it's a thing that Open Rent Initiative is building. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And if I can, just on the technical side, because I'm really interested in this, again, you've got multiple data sources where you can get some information, maybe highly detailed if you're able to scrape a listing for a particular parcel, um, maybe more aggregate if it's coming from the ACS or Zillow. But it seems like you've got a nice framework to have a robust, like machine learning type of model to impute rents for those parcels you don't observe. Is that something that you've thought about implementing, or just again to fill in the gaps with these data and allow for that really disaggregated analysis? So, for instance, we could look at, as Flo is suggesting, like how different neighborhoods across St. Paul, in this case, are either covered or not by these affordable units or the new market exemption.
Yeah, I mean that's such a great question. We've thought a lot about doing like, and in fact, we're in the process of building like an internal data science practice around some of this work and like
Mhm.
doing this type of like question or working on this type of question. In particular, like the three like facets that we're focused on is figuring out which parcels have rental units, because that's not always easy. Um, if we don't know what rental values are, actually understanding what those rental values are and imputing them in places. And then finally understanding vacancy. So in the long run, using listing data, there are like ways in which you could understand vacancy as well, by doing some kind of construction around that. Um, yeah, but Benin, did you have another perspective on this?
No. I mean, that is the thing that I'm most excited about. I think there's the two things I'm excited about with this initiative are, one, kind of what we're showing you around the ability to use technology to efficiently kind of aggregate this data and make it easily available. So that's like one thing. And then the second is to then, if we have, wide set of data points for every single unit, for every single parcel, for every single, or for as many, for enough of a sample set, we can build the models to actually estimate the number, in particular three numbers that Arjun mentioned for every unit in the country. So that is our goal.
Yeah, excellent.
So, with what Flo just highlighted, I think this is such an interesting analysis. It's very focused in St. Paul and the particular local dynamics there, but I think it reflects sort of the mindset that we're trying to bring towards the problem itself in that three-pronged approach that I spoke about a little bit earlier, and and really like um and really what we're trying to do is take this approach and scale it up into multiple phases of this project. So yeah, what you saw today is really just a microcosm powered by our prototype and specifically by the work that is being done in St. Paul, and then the work that Housing Link is doing. And the next step for us from here looks like building a pilot of this initiative. And what that really is a full implementation of understanding all the data sets in two specific geographies that we've selected, which is Minnesota and the Bay Area. And then in particular, using those data sets and integrating them into a fully featured platform that can house these, that we can use to generate insights and so on. And then, so we're in the process of securing fundraising and actually building towards that pilot. But then from that, the next step essentially looks like taking that pilot and scaling that into a national growing ecosystem of practitioners and partners that are contributing to the data set and then also gaining from that infrastructure. So really thinking about this as like a large and open community of folks that contribute and benefit from one shared infrastructure platform. And then from here, just again taking another step back and talking about at least the way that I see the value proposition of the platform for the world, which is that pooling resources into just this one initiative creates many downstream impacts. It has an impact on filling this critical data gap with an open and sustainable model that can survive in the long run and can have a community built around it. There's Rent is not just about housing, it's also about the local economy and community development. And so the impact that this information can have is across multiple different sectors of what people interact with daily. And then finally, it creates an ecosystem of local leaders and practitioners that sort of all work with this data to create impact in their communities and the things that they want to influence. So the tagline is that if we want a fairer economy, we need fairer data. And this is our approach to it.
That's great. And I will share too, I've talked with you guys in the past, and it's really benefited already one of my PhD students who's leveraged your data, and you're pointing out of these vast differences in different data sources measuring rents, and she appreciated that and being able to use your data kind of provide robustness for some work she'd been doing on a particular policy analysis, looking at the opportunity zones coming from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and their impacts on local rents. Through incentivizing more residential construction. So already I've seen benefits from this for research. I think the policy implications are clear. I don't know, many of you on this call may be too young to remember the rent is too damn high party. But people felt rent being too high. Here you can clearly show kind of how rent is high and varying across different areas, and hopefully get policies that can really target and alleviate that high rent burden you've noted that many Americans have. So really applaud the effort here.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, we're going to have a lot more coming up over the next couple of weeks. And so you can learn more at citizencodex.com. Or if you want to reach out, have ideas, or anything else about the initiative, you can reach out at citizencodex.com as well. But thank you for your engagement. Yeah.
Arjun, Biniam, Flo, Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.